welcome to our webinar tonight. We thank Chris and Anne very much for sharing their information and knowledge with us. And this event sponsor for tonight is Recovery Management Solutions, a Vault Health company powered by FSS Solutions. And again, we thank them too. Thanks, Suzanne. This webinar has been approved for 1 hour of nursing CE through the California Board of Nursing. A survey link will be sent by email after the webinar. A certificate of completion with the CEs will be sent by email once the survey has been completed. Video recording will be added when available. The CE is available for recorded sessions as well from our website. The final session is next month, December 14th, on mindfulness, which is a term often used and much understood. And I'll be talking about that one. So I hope you come. We want to see you, but please mute your mics so there's no distracting noise. I need to do mine too, so my dogs won't be barking. So mute your microphone, but please keep your cameras on. So tonight we're going to be talking about publishing basics with Anne and Chris. You can all read the learner objectives. Anne Mitchell is a professor of nursing and psychiatry at the University of Pittsburgh School of Nursing. She's a fellow in the International Academy of Addictions Nursing and the American Academy of Nursing. Dr. Mitchell's scholarly interests include mental health outcomes research, bereavement following a death by suicide, and screening, brief intervention, and referral to treatment, or SBIRT. She has served as project director and project coordinator on 2 HRSA-funded projects designed to teach SBIRT to interprofessional groups of students and healthcare professionals. She's the current editor-in-chief of the Journal of Addictions Nursing. Dr. Chris Farakis first became interested in the fields of addictions nursing during her work in a medical emergency clinic. This led her to shift her specialty from acute care nursing to ambulatory nursing in a methadone maintenance treatment center in Atlanta, Georgia. She has consistently advocated for nurses, no matter the specialty or setting, to identify patients at risk for substance use disorders and intervene with a focus on prevention, identification, and early intervention. She first published the coined phrase, quote, "Addictions nursing is knowledge specific, not setting specific," unquote. She's a retiring co-founder and editor for the Journal of Addictions Nursing and has authored numerous publications on the subject of nursing and addictions. And again, thank you so very much for being with us tonight.
Okay, so hi everyone, I'm Anne Mitchell, the current editor in the Journal of Addictions Nursing. And both Chris and I would like to acknowledge the International Society of Addiction Journal Editors because we're learning so much from that group of individuals. Next slide. One of the things that, we really wanted to kind of stress is that there are a number of reasons for people to feel the pressure to publish. And that could be whether you're trying to get accepted into a graduate school or for an internship, whether you want to try to get grants or fellowships, and also for your employment and promotion, especially if you're in academia. Next slide. So tonight we're going to cover 4 major issues around authorship and publications, and that'll be authorship decisions, ethical dilemmas, timetables, and career opportunities.
So the first topic is authorship issues. And we could spend actually the whole hour, if not more, on this topic alone. Since before 1975, but first let me just mention that there were over 30 million articles published in PubMed that were reviewed to see the number of authors. So before 1975, there was an average of 1.9 authors per article. Then between 2015 and 2019, there were an average of 5.9 authors per article. So it can be many more than that. Anne and I have seen at least 12 on an article. So that brings up a whole host of issues for authors. and mainly the order, giving people credit if they've actually contributed substantially to an article or a manuscript, and then what about the order of authors? How do we determine that? So it has to be a collective decision, obviously, of the group of people who are working on a manuscript. This is kind of a funny thing that Anne had, that shows sometimes how giving credit is inappropriate at times. We just can't just give credit to willy-nilly because we like somebody or for political reasons or because they glanced at the article or maybe they came up with the title. But people have to work substantially on a manuscript in order to get credit. So you can look at this at as your leisure. What contributions actually deserve authorship? Well, you have to write something. There's not different requirements for students, by the way, although sometimes it's been known for students to get the shaft, so to speak, and be put as last author, or sometimes not given authorship at all for their project. Sometimes the faculty takes over and takes credit, especially in these times when there's so much pressure on faculty to author papers. But basically they should get the same treatment as everyone else in the group who's working on an article. So you have to write something, you have to make a major creative, intellectual, or integral contribution to the work. Write the first draft, do the analysis, be prepared to take public responsibility for the whole content of the article. So everybody on the team, the authorship team, needs to be willing to take responsibility. Examples that are usually required in combination, in addition to what we've already discussed, is somebody who develops the research design, writes sections of the paper. They integrate diverse theoretical perspectives, develop new conceptual models, contribute to data analysis and decisions, and interpret results. So you can see that there's actually a lot of opportunity for authorship, and these things can be divided up. It used to be that one person who authored an article did everything. But now with so many authors, a lot of this work can be divided up, and that requires a lot of communication. A lot of things can happen that can change this. For example, let's say you realize that you need to expand the article, that you don't have all the expertise you need on your team, so that you may need to then reach out for somebody else, and the whole team needs to meet again and make decisions then about the order of the authors. So discuss early on, for sure, and then ongoing during the project. Read about authorship ethics and check for guidelines. There's so many good sources: APA, the International the International Society of Journal Editors. It has a definite list of things. The International Medical Society of Medical Ethics is another great source. So you can look at these sources and then have rationale for whatever decisions are made around authorship. Ethics are really important. We can't check on everything. It's not the editor's responsibility to determine authorship and how the order of authors. It's up to the group of authors themselves and their institution if they can't resolve it. The editor does not have a role in that. The editor's role might be something like, well, we need to have a list of all the contributions of each of the authors in the article that you've submitted. And they're required to sometimes each journal has in their instructions for authors, and when they're on the submission process, it has a form that has to be signed. Yes, I did contribute substantially to this article. Except under exceptional circumstances, a student is listed as a principal author on any multi-authored article that is substantially the student's doctoral dissertation or even master's paper thesis. So
We just have a few words about publishing your thesis or dissertation. Basically, because this is where, for many people who are beginning to be published, start. Next slide. So, when you think about the amount of work that you've done, either for your thesis or dissertation, it represents years of quality work. You already have something written, and Chris, the next slide. You already have something written, and it's available with your co-authors, who are usually your faculty advisors there to help. Dissertations these days are either written in a monograph or a manuscript style. Next slide. And there are numerous online dissertation indexing and publishing resources where you can submit your dissertation to be published, as well as finding other people's dissertations online. Next slide. I think one of the things that we have an obligation when we're working with students is to help them be able to reformat all of that information that went into their thesis or their dissertation into a publishable manuscript. And so you might want to write a letter to the editor to see if there's any interest in the topic. The student and the faculty advisor must check for author guidelines. One of the things that Chris and I say in every presentation that we do these days is check the author guidelines, follow the author guidelines, and it's not good enough to follow them up to 95%. They need to be followed 100%, because otherwise all of that work will just get turned back without even being reviewed. To understand the idea that rejection is part of the process, and even editors who have been in the field for 20 years still get a paper rejected. And then you want to make sure that you're incorporating any feedback and try again. Never give up. Patience is the key. One of the things that we do talk about is not only students, but faculty, professionals in low and middle income countries are challenged by, first of all, inadequate resources, lots of competing priorities. Not only are they expected to publish, but they are expected to perhaps have a teaching load of 5 or 7 classes. And they may have few mentors available to them. And both Chris and I have been working with a number of faculty from low and middle income countries in the last couple of months, and they are so appreciative of any support that they receive. Next slide. What we want to try to do is, set a priority to allow data to reach a broader audience that's going to be able to impact policies around the world. And so it is extremely important for us to hear from international countries, and again, countries from low and middle incomes. One of the things that we do have available are a number of external resources. I think Chris has mentioned a couple of them in terms of the APA, COPE, and the International Society of Addiction Journal Editors also has a mentorship program. And you want to find a mentor who is familiar with the process of publication, especially if you're in an environment where you don't have a lot of ongoing support. Next slide. There is a book it's available online. It's called Publishing Addiction Science, and it has a list of about 75 addiction specific journals. And all of these journals would love to hear from you if you have something that you would like to submit for publication. They may consider case studies, letters to the editor, policy pieces, op-ed pieces, dissertations or theses, again, definitely if they have been revised. And one of the things that we say when you're thinking about choosing a journal is, to scan the journal contents and, see if what you are proposing fits into that. And also, it's an opportunity to check for the style of writing for that particular journal. Next slide. For those people that aren't native English speakers, we highly recommend that you find a English language certificate program to edit or actually perhaps become a co-author of the paper. And you can find these folks at international conferences or again at the Ice Age website, which has a list of contacts that you can contact. Next slide. The good news is that really in addiction science, it's it's a small field compared to many other fields, not only in nursing, but in addiction medicine. So there are lots of things to write about, and that all of the obstacles or barriers that you may, come in contact with, every single one of them is going to be surmountable.
All right. So a little bit more about authorship. We have a responsibility to the public for truth publication. And we also have a responsibility to make sure that there's equitable assignment of credit. So if someone writes a substantial part of the manuscript, but if it wasn't their idea or their research work, they may be second author. But that will be worked out between the two of them. And if there are other authors, that has to be worked out too. So everybody meets and discusses this. So many people obviously need to be productive to get promoted, and it's prestigious to be noted as be known as an expert in your little niche, your area of research. What are some of the common authorship problems? Failure to involve potential collaborators. It's not uncommon for people to leave folks out who should be authors. Now, there is a difference between acknowledging people who may have perhaps just reviewed your analysis and given you a little feedback, say a statistician, that you can acknowledge that person in the acknowledgements with a footnote. But somebody who's been a major collaborator, has considerable input, has to be recognized. So you don't want to not do that. You don't want to give undeserved gift authorship. Politically, it's probably a good idea to include my chair and on this. In Anne's and my work with some of these countries that are low income, there's a lot of pressure to include sometimes the department chair in the article, and there's actually, for some countries, there's absolutely no choice about it. They have to include these folks. So hopefully that doesn't really happen here, but it may happen as well in developed countries, but it's not discussed and nobody talks about it or whatever. Or the university where they're employed, if they are employed at a university, doesn't have any rules around that. There may be a need eventually to have committees at universities that go beyond the human subjects or ethics committee that determines safety for human subjects or animal subjects, but there really aren't that we know of are ways for people to bring issues to a committee at a university around authorship. Poor judgment about relative contributions. You really need to take a look at some of the resources we mentioned to see what is the best way to distribute authorship for contributions made. So there shouldn't be ambiguity about the process, especially if you've been meeting with your team. If you come up with a plan and then put it as the lead writer and the corresponding author in the article, if you put it before your committee, here's what we're going to do in terms of contributions. Who wants to do this part? Who wants to do that part? And this is how we'll order the authorship. Keep in mind that sometimes a research project generates several articles. So if you're not the lead author on one, you may be on one of the others. So sometimes it's not worth arguing about just one single paper. If you do get authorship, at least on the paper, but put forth your be assertive and say that you want to be the lead author or the second author on blah 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 paper in the as one of the outputs. I think APA, one suggestion is put the authors in alphabetical order, especially if everybody's had equal contributions to the manuscript. Or maybe the next article, it'll be reverse alphabetical order. And then, of course, the other method is by relative contributions to the paper. The main authors first, and then often the senior author, the person whose grant everybody was working on, and but it was the grant leader who wrote the original grant. That person may get last, and that's okay if that's the agreement of the group. So what is authorship? All persons named as authors should have made a contribution to the work. Some say, some of the writings, APA says a substantial contribution to the work, not a minimal, irrelevant contribution. And be prepared to take responsibility for the contents, public responsibility for the contents. So, so that's what, both of those are important. So again, these are the these are the potential guidelines for you to use to back up your plan as the lead author for authorship in your in whatever paper you're publishing. So the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, I really like. It has some really good information on authorship and giving authorship credit. And of course, APA doesn't have a whole lot. ISAJE has some, but not really a whole lot either. So I really like the International Committee, and it's easy to find, icmje.org to check it out. So it's a pragmatic process, selecting, determining authorship order. Recognize that group authorship is a social process. It's a discussion, it's ongoing, especially if changes occur in the manuscript, like somebody decides they don't want to do this anymore, they back out of the publication. Jerry and I and Donna Wolf, when we published our book on addictions in '83, we had somebody drop out. So one of us just took over and wrote the chapter, or you can find someone else to choose to write that part. It's not uncommon for the lead author to take over that part though and do it, because otherwise things drag on if people don't do their part. Establish expectations for openness, fairness, and being ethical. And then of course choose a leader, and that's usually that happens pretty quickly. And then discuss authorship at each stage. Make sure that people are aware that sometimes somebody will say, gee, I'd like to write that part too. And so that might change their order. So who did what and how much?
So we're going to just briefly touch on how to write a scientific paper for a peer-reviewed journal. Next slide. So I think, the reason that we want to publish is that it speaks to our aspirations to contribute to addiction science. And in a large part, the role comes through being published in peer-reviewed journals. Next slide. So again, one of the first things that we're going to ask is, am I going to write this paper alone or with colleagues? And you certainly want to seek colleagues who are critical yet supportive and reliable, and who you can trust to meet deadlines. And then you want to think about what journal you want to make your submission to. and, think about, is your data more relevant for a national or an international audience, and then gear your journal search toward that. Next slide. Again, a frequently misstep is to not complying with the journal style guide. And again, I say it's not enough to comply only with our reference citation style and then send your manuscript in. You really need to read word for word, detail for detail, what those journal author guidelines are. Two things will happen if you don't. One is the paper will be turned around and sent back without even being reviewed. And secondly, you may end up annoying the editor, and you really don't want to do that. As Richard Sates, our famous mentor, has said many times, don't annoy the editor. And so you really want to take the time and make sure you understand those author guidelines. Next slide. Again, it's 100% of the style and format guidelines. If it's only 90% or 95%, that's not good enough. Again, read and follow the journal's instructions for authors. We can't, actually, we want to actually have that written at the bottom of every slide that we ever present, but you get the idea. Next slide.
It's pretty important.
Yeah.
So, and we're not the only ones, by the way. You all, Ann and I belong to, a couple of editors groups. So we talk with and work with editors from all kinds of journals, nursing and addictions. That comes up at our meetings. It's the issue with everybody, and it can be really hard on an author if they don't follow the author's guidelines. There's nothing worse than getting a paper that obviously they didn't even look at them. So back it goes, and then they'll have to eventually probably redo their references because add to their references because they're out of date. All right, so we're going to talk about the writing process now. I would suggest sending an email to the editor. I've had many people do that over the years to me, and it really is helpful. Let them know, no, this is really not appropriate for our journal, or yes, our readers would really be interested in that topic. As soon as we receive it, we'll send it out for review. So that's a good thing to do if you're an author, and the editor likes that. So it might look favorably. So if the response is favorable, you can begin writing. If unfavorable, look for another journal. Start with us, though. Don't go to those other 75. I'm just kidding. The first, whoops, did I skip over one? No. Oh, okay. The next step is too many beginning researchers fail to make clear what is the original contribution of a paper. Science journals exist primarily to publish original knowledge. So you want to make sure that your paper is all about what you're doing to add to the growing edge of literature in your subtopic area. So we need original, people want original work. Second step on number 2, this is the title. The title shouldn't be something weird like Angel Dust Not Heaven Sent, although that was a popular topic way back in 79, I guess. But in general, though, you don't want to have something really off the wall because it'll come back to haunt you. Read the table of contents, as Ann mentioned, of the journal you're interested in, to see what are the typical titles. You can also see the style. There's a lot of things you can tell by looking at the contents, the table of contents of a journal. So you want to avoid anything cute or trendy. Your abstract should summarize how you carried out your research and what you learned. You'll find out when you go to the submission section of a journal to see if they want an abstract. Usually they're 200, 250, not more than 300 words, but usually around 250. Don't go beyond what you establish in your paper. Don't start talking off on some tangent. It's really hard to be efficient, but efficiency in words and content is like the key to excellent writing, but it's not easy to do. If we sit down and start writing and we start meandering all over the place. So it's really good to have an outline. If I can advise you all, and many of you already know this, but if you don't, it really helps you, gives you boundaries, and it kind of leads you from one thing to another, so that you have, so your information follows in a logical manner. Don't speculate. Don't make any vague assertions, and stay within the word count limit. That's another thing. You know, a journal editor doesn't want to see a 30-page or your dissertation or your thesis sent to them for publication. Did they expect us to turn that into an article? Well, no, that's not going to happen. So stay within the word limit, and every instructions for authors lets you know what the page limit is and or the word limit. Tell the reader why the paper is important and original. The research question, the context of the paper, and what gap the research fills. This is really important. This research will show that blah, 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 blah. And it's based on the fact that we know very little, and you can do some references to show why your paper is going to add, your research report is going to add to the knowledge in this field. Do not describe the substance or problem under study. You don't want to describe that here in the introduction. This is where you want to give a punch and show that what the issue is here. Do not include other fascinating work that's tangential or barely related to the central topic. You'll lose people, and they'll lose interest in your work. The literature review, people sometimes do not review things like the methods, the procedures, and instruments that were used in other studies. It's important to include citations on these areas too, as well as the main topic of your literature that you're doing for your study. Some mistakes to avoid: do not let each person insist on personal favorites of their own work, their own publications. Sometimes people want to get their stuff in because they want to get noticed for their work and that kind of thing. So do not try to hide or disguise poor methods, because experienced reviewers will notice. And let them know in the limitation section, you will discuss any issues with your methods. But don't try to hide it. There's no point in that. It's really okay. You can still publish it, even if you have limitations frequently. So there's no need to do that. The results. Here you describe the outcome from your research, verify that your original findings that will be discussed later are included. You don't want to go into great detail of overwriting or undue weight to non-significant results. Just be pointed to the main outcomes and your original findings, and just note that they're included. You don't want to go off on a big discussion here. Now, here's where you get to discuss a little bit. This is where you get to kind of expand, describe the results. But don't go off on some tangent or include references here that have nothing to do with the research you were doing. Stay focused. And again, if you have your outline, that'll help you. So you don't want to bring any new issues in that are not addressed by others. Just stick to describing the results within addiction science. Avoid any speculation, as I mentioned, and don't say much more research is needed. I know everybody says that, but try to avoid saying that. If you think more research is needed, say specifically what you think is needed. Now, in terms of limitations, This is your opportunity to talk about the, the problems with your method. I couldn't get a random sample. I couldn't randomly assign. It's a convenience sample. There was a snowball sample, whatever. Just talk about the limitations of that. I wasn't able to get as many subjects as I would have liked. But don't make excuses for it. Don't ingratiate yourself and apologize. Promise never to make these mistakes again. You don't need to do that. Just present the facts, ma'am, please. So the references, the reference list allows the reader to retrace all of the evidence that you cite. I always suggest to check all your citations to make sure you have references for them. And then you look at the citations and make sure you have citations for the references. So you want to do that cross-check and go back and forth, because you can, omit either way. And it's really easy to do that. So know the reference guide inside and out, because again, I can't believe it. Sometimes even people don't even do APA correctly. They haven't. Obviously, we can tell they haven't read the instructions for authors. So you start feeling a little irritated with that. Now, is this you, Ann?
Yeah. So
Okay.
just in terms of appendices, sometimes you may decide to put your protocol or copies of your instruments or your procedures in the paper. But that does not have to go into the page count. And so you could add that as an appendix. And sometimes that could be as supplemental digital material. So it's not going to take up physical pages in the actual journal. It's easy to include too much information here. So you probably will be checking with the editor to see how many pages you may have for an appendix. Next slide. So in terms of feedback, one of the things that we always say is that if you can, please have a colleague read your paper. We get so ingrained and we're reading things so many times, it's so easy to skip over a misspelled word or an inappropriate use of a word or inappropriate data analysis. So you really want to ask a colleague to review the paper before you submit. Next slide. So now your paper is ready to submit to the editor. This is a huge step, and this is the time to congratulate yourself. Next step. However, in general, most papers are not accepted on the first submission, and you will get peer reviews that your peers will ask for perhaps some clarification in some areas. If you think that they are so severe and you can't respond to them, you can certainly discuss that with the editor. But if you decide to answer their critique, what you want to do is really outline every one of their comments. And then in the second column, spell out exactly how and where you address the issue. Now, there is the opportunity here also to really say that you aren't going to respond to one critique because A, B, or C. It might not be appropriate, that was beyond the scope of your paper, something like that. And you can respond in a very collegial way and let the reviewer know that these are the critiques that you will respond to, and you're not going to respond to that one. Next slide. If your paper is rejected, basically you want to consider all of the critiques and think about whether or not you want to resubmit to that journal, or you may want to take those critiques, revise your paper, and prepare it and get it ready to submit to another journal. Next slide. The final decision about whether your paper is going to get published is going to depend upon its importance and originality. Any reviewer concerns, if there is a fatal flaw, for example, plagiarism, it just won't fly. It may not have to do with the mesh with the journal philosophy. Again, the number of pages that a journal has is a huge issue. So it also depends on the space that is available, as well as the amount of editorial work that might be required. Okay, so lastly, reading the proofs. Once you are accepted, you will have little to do with your paper until you get your page proofs. And this is your job to be very careful and go through to see any queries that the production team has. And if the editor is suggesting a revision, you may want to ask yourself, has my meaning been respected, or has it been changed? And if the meaning is unchanged, you may want to trust the editor's judgment and let it be. And then often in retrospect, you can go back and say, oh yes, that was reworded in a much better way. But lastly, you want to congratulate yourselves on having contributed to addiction science. So, thank you.
Okay, I just wanted to point out one thing that I wanted to add, you all, before we hit questions, and that is that it's sometimes it's disheartening when you receive an article. I mean, the reviews from the publisher. I mean, from the editor. And the reviewers, and you just think, oh my gosh, I thought I had a perfect paper, and look at this, I have to do all this work. But the point of it is that that's like a gift. Think of it as a gift that the paper will have your name on it. You will be publishing that paper in probably a very good journal, a peer-reviewed journal. And it's an opportunity just to make your paper stronger. So think of it that way. And if you do get rejected, as Anne mentioned, you can revise it. It'll be stronger, and then submit it somewhere else. So think of it in a very positive way, because we all have had papers rejected and or told to revise substantially. So so think of it that way. Okay. Any questions? Time for questions, I guess.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Thanks, Anne. That was great.
Sure.
We don't have any questions in the chat room, but there may be people who'd like to comment or share their experience. We have, I don't know, 7 more minutes, so we can do that. I do have one question. I've edited or volunteered to edit research papers from one of the low-income countries that you referenced. And sometimes the almost authoritarian tone of the text is very difficult. And it's very hard it was very hard for me to know what to say that was still welcoming and the great information, but the opinion has to go.
Right. Yeah, what you can just, I think in a nice way, in my opinion, and Anne probably has something to say as well. In a nice way, let them know that, that it has to be factual, that in order to get published in a English language journal, you cannot, scold people or be too righteous in your narrative, and that you need to stick to facts and report it as such. You can make suggestions maybe in the conclusion of your paper, but anyway.
Yeah, it's kind of like even with students, they may say, this proves that so-and-so. is the cause. Well, it's not proven, you know. So we might be lending a little bit support to something,
Right.
you know, so
Yeah.
it's like, you know, pull back on some of the vocabulary.
Yeah, I tell my students, you really know somebody who understands research when they say there is some evidence that in some cases this may be true.
Maybe. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Is it causal or is it correlation? Very difficult. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone else has anything they'd like to say. Please unmute yourself and join in.
Is this recorded? Can people access this later on?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So the folks who maybe signed up who are not able to be here today can look at it at their leisure.
Yeah, it will be available from the website.
Oh, okay.
All of the webinars are.
Oh, okay, good.
Right.
Anyone else?
Well,
I
we
do
are
wanna-
always, I
Go
do want
ahead,
to
Ann.
say the Journal of Addictions Nursing is always looking for manuscripts with up-to-date information, so feel free to submit.
Thank you.
And I'd like to say in the issue that'll be coming out next, if I may, Ann, of the journal, a number 32-4, the last issue this year, we'll have an interview with me by Joan Cubb, where I will discuss the history of the journal and
Nice.
how it all started, and then we're writing an editorial where I'll be acknowledging people who have retired as editor, on the editorial board. I probably don't acknowledge the current editorial board. I do thank them as a whole, but don't mention names particularly unless they were a column editor or something. But that's a sort of I never really got an opportunity to do that. So I was happy to have that chance.
Wonderful. We look forward to that journal. Thank you. If there are no other questions, comments, we can close out the session with a great deal of thanks to Chris and Ann for their sharing their expertise. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Good to see everyone.
Yes, it was great. Thank you. Take care.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.